Hello everybody and welcome to Module 8 Video 2. Now we're going to get more into the ritual tools and the techniques. We're going to look at the historic practices of ritual and really sort of understand the different pieces that fit together when we're creating our rituals. Okay, so let's start off with the idea of purification. Okay, now purification is not necessarily something that we're always going to think of as important in paganism. This is because we consider nature to be really good and sacred, okay? And the gods themselves are part of nature. So nature, it doesn't need purifying. We don't need to purify nature in some way. It's not fallen, it's not bad, it's a good thing, okay, nature. However, many of the Indo-European religions, as well as other religions as well, they emphasize ritual purity before approaching the divine or before going to a sacred space or a shrine. So I want to talk through some of the things within heathenry, some of the evidence we've got, and why I think actually purification is an important part of the practice. Okay, but the important thing to get first is that it's not to do with purifying some sort of fallen nature that's a bad thing. Okay. So certain places in nature are often seen as more sacred than others. Okay, so you've got groves, you've got waterfalls and things like that. There's also evidence, clear evidence, in fact, that places are marked off for ritual. Okay, so again, they seem to be considered more sacred than other places. Okay, and the word sacred itself, it means set apart. So we're talking about things that are set apart from the mundane world, okay, for a special purpose. There's evidence of taboos that surround these sacred places in heathenry. So weapons, for instance, are banned. Okay, could they pollute the space? Maybe, for instance, Frere's temple, you're not allowed to shed blood in it. Maybe blood, from at least from human blood anyway, is seen as something that can pollute the space. Obviously, animal sacrifices, they had blood from that, so that wasn't polluting. Okay. But weapons, or maybe it's the violent, angry, negative thoughts that is the thing that can pollute the space. Okay, the space is supposed to be a place of frith, space to be a place of peace, but actually, if you come in with violent, angry, negative thoughts, if you've got weapons and you're trying to fight people, and that's not making the space a sacred place. And maybe that's the filth that we're talking about here that needs purifying. So when you're coming into a sacred space, you want to make sure that weapons are banned, so there's not carrying weapons. Okay, you're not having violent, angry, and negative thoughts. Okay, you're coming in with a mindset of frith towards others, and frith means peace. Okay, it means security. We're going to explore it in more detail in one of the later modules, but basically it means that you're all a community, you're all looking out for each other, you're all peaceful and secure with each other, okay? You've got everyone's best interest in heart. So that's part of it, okay? Then you can consider maybe some special clothing, okay? So you could wear, say, a robe. A lot of pagans nowadays do. In Vatnsdæla saga, it mentions red blot clothes. Okay, and the Gotland picture stones also show priests in long robes. So maybe having a special type of clothing will help to set you apart. Okay, you put it on as a part of your ritual purity. Obviously, keep those clothes clean and washed and nice. But you're just taking off your mundane clothes and you're putting on something special. We've got other sources, though, that mention nudity. So you've got your Bronze Age rock art figures that are nude. You've got in Ibn Fadlan, the man who lit the funeral pyre was nude. And in Tacitus, it talks about Germanic youth dancing nude in rituals. That said, on the opposite side of things, you've got Landnámabók, which it talks about Helgafell Mountain. Okay, and this is a mountain that was considered so holy you weren't even allowed to look towards it unless you'd washed first. Okay, so not just entering it, but not even looking at it without being washed. Okay, and nothing's also allowed to be killed on the mountain, again for purification, for so that it's pure. There's no pollution from killing. Okay. And Havermal 61, it says, washed and fed, a man should ride to the assembly. Now, the assembly here, the thing, that's the sort of parliament or the trials and jury place. It's the community assembly, okay, where really important matters are decided and where worship of the gods would have happened, things like that. So this is saying that you should be washed before you go there. So these are examples, okay, of where you need to have something that you need to be in some way specially changed, whether that's special clothes or no clothes, whether that's being washed, whether that's having your mind purified. All these things feed into this idea that there is some sort of purification before ritual that's needed. Okay, so it does seem that washing and purification is a factor in ancient heathen religious practice. If we go further, you've got Viking graves. Okay, they have lots of items for hygiene and grooming in them, like combs, tweezers, ear cleaners, razors. And historical sources comment on the fact that they bathe a lot. Okay, in fact, there's an Anglo-Saxon Christian source which complains that the Anglo-Saxon women liked the Vikings more because they bathed once a week, whereas the Anglo-Saxon didn't. Yeah, there's good evidence that they did. Okay, and they tended to use hot springs, rivers, baths, and possibly even saunas. There's quite a history of sauna use in Scandinavia, which may mean the Vikings also did that. Ibn Fadlin mentions that they wash their hands and their hair daily. Now, some people have theorized, why would you be purified? Why would you need to wash before coming before the gods? Well, some of it is that the spirits might be sensitive to scents, okay? So some they hate, while others they like, for instance, incense, okay? And that's probably different for different spirits. So if you're smelling like human, you're not smelling very nice, for instance, the spirits are not going to be interested in coming to see you, okay? Just as if you went to see a friend and you hadn't had a shower or something, they wouldn't be very happy with you being there with the smells and things. So, but if you've got incense where you smell nice and you've been purified, then they're going to enjoy that more and they'll be happy that you're there, okay? Vikings called Saturday Lorgardager, bath day, okay? So you could do, for instance, a weekly purification bath, okay, on Saturdays with some special ingredients, okay? And even the gods themselves have to be ritually bathed. For instance, in Tacitus, it talks about Nerthus, her statue being ritually washed before it goes back onto the island. After it's been around in a procession around the community, then gets washed and then it goes back onto the island. So it's really about respect. Okay, it's purification, but it's not purification because the world is bad. Okay, it's purification to make you not smell bad, respecting others. Like I said, if you visit friends, you normally would bathe first, so you're clean and don't smell. You're showing respect to other people. Okay, so you need to do the same thing with the gods and the spirits. You bathe first, you make sure you're clean, and then and maybe you do that special weekly purification bath as well, with maybe some ritual salts and Epsom salts and things and stuff like that. And then you can go before them. Okay, it's just show respect. Now, the Greeks, they had this really special cleansing water called kurnips. Okay, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but that's how I spelt it. So it's a special cleansing water you always have to do before you go before any of the gods. And basically you get some salt water and you add fire to it by lighting some herbs or some incense and then like maybe a bay leaf or something and then putting them out in the water. Okay, and then you use that water to wash your hands and your face. Okay, or you can just use normal clean water, but this special water, this lustral water, it's called kurnips. So maybe we can adopt that Greek practice. There's not evidence of it being used in Viking times or heathenry, but there's nothing to stop us bringing that into ours, okay, into heathenry. So ritually bathe before you do a ritual, clean your teeth, use clean clothes or no clothes, and have a nice scent in the area with incense of some kind, okay? And you may want to do like a special cleansing. So where you have this, if you make this Kernips bowl, maybe you specifically cleanse your hands for actions, your mouth for words, and your forehead for thoughts. Okay, so perhaps have a special bowl for this just outside your sacred space. Actually, if you look at the Japanese kami as well, their Shinto religion, again, you have to be purified before you approach the spirits of nature. So they always have like a little bowl or a little stream near the temple where you go and wash your hands and your lips first, and then you can go in and talk to the spirits. So basically, yeah, think about having a weekly purification bath. Think about making Kernips water and having a bowl just outside your ritual area that before you enter the ritual area, you wash maybe your hands, maybe your lips, maybe your forehead as well. Okay. So we're going to talk about creating sacred space. It's not just a sacred space that needs to be set apart. We ourselves need to be pure and sacred too. Okay. We need to be set apart for this special action. Okay. Now, the next sort of technique is procession. Okay. And processions do seem to play an important part in heathen rituals. So you've got Bronze Age rock art, which depicts ship or wagon processions. Sometimes the sun is also being pulled along in procession on a chariot. And H.R. Ellis Davidson says, there is abundant evidence for ships carried in processions and kept in churches in Scandinavia from the Middle Ages down to modern times. Some of those from Denmark being used for ceremonies for blessing the fields. So here we've got some sort of fertility processions going on with ships, and they're being kept in churches in medieval modern times. Okay. You've got Tacitus, who talks about the Earth Mother goddess Nerthus, and she's being drawn around around the land in a chariot to bless the people. And then you've also got examples of Freyr and Litir, who may also be Freyr, their statues, again, being drawn around in wagons to bless the land. So this procession of the gods seems to be a really important part of heathen ritual. In Njal Saga, there's a wagon in a temple, which again is to pull Thor's statue. And we find in peat bogs, which is where they often would sacrifice a lot of their most important items to the gods, we find wagons in there. Okay, so clearly they've probably been used for a sacred purpose. So a great way, if you're going to do your ritual, a great way to start it is a procession up to the particular site or the altar. So even if you're in a room, you can do a procession from one edge of the room to the other edge of the room where your altar is. If you're outside, or if you're going to your an altar in the garden, you can do a sort of procession from your front door to that place. You can decide how you do that procession. If you've got a group of people together, you could have people beating drums and blowing horns and carrying torches of fire. That's all a very effective thing to do. But you can also just do it in silence, or you can carry the statues of the gods from where you start your procession to the ritual site. Perhaps you chant their names as you're doing so. Or you can do what they did in Heimskringla, which we'll see later, where everyone is supposed to bring all their animals that are going to be sacrificed to the place. So using that as our inspiration, you could say that carrying the offerings in procession instead is a good idea. So rather than carrying the statues of the gods, you carry the offerings with you as you process deliberately to the place. Or perhaps carry fire to the site and then use that to light the main fire. That's another thing you could do. Okay. So these are different examples of where in heathen times they've done something to process to, like, usually with the gods around a place, or bring in offerings. And you also can do those sorts of things in your ritual. But an important thing to remember is symmetry. Okay. part of setting up and the order of ritual is making it symmetrical. Okay, you want it, what you do at the beginning to also be what you do at the end. Okay, so if you're processing to a space, then at the end you want to turn that round and process back out of the space. Okay, so you're doing it essentially in the reverse order. Okay, so let's look again at sacred space. Now, we did talk about this in module 2, and so I'm just going to recap really quickly on that and then dive a bit deeper, basically. So, as we said, ancient heathens saw some places as more sacred than others. Okay, they set up sacred space, whether they called this the Vey, the Hurga, the Weir, the Hof. If you remember, the Vey was the sort of area that had been marked out by rope around the boundary. Got the Hurga, which is the pile of stones, the Weir, which was often a small altar on the roadside, or the Hof, which means the temple or the hall. We talked about the earliest evidence where they did ritual outside in groves, on hilltops, at sacred trees, wells, shafts, rivers, lakes, grave mounds. Okay, and they didn't just go there. They had special things set up. Okay, so they had altars made with piles of stones. They had tent-like structures, and they had spaces marked off, or enclosures even, marked off with ropes or hedges. Okay, and then we saw how they later moved indoors, and they used the home or the hall, and eventually they had temples. Now, we also talked about the impact that they had these 3 important parts to their ritual. If we think about Upasala's temple, they have a tree or pillar, they have a well, and then they have their hall where they're doing the actual ritual itself. Okay, so they're important bits that help to make up the sacred space. We've talked about being on our altar. We want a pillar, a tree, we want a well, we want a fire, and things like that. Okay, we did talk about fire and the fact that it's the central feature in a sacred space. Okay, whether that's to show hospitality, because it's important to warm your guests when they come, to transform the offerings into something, to bless or purify the area and drive away anything that was not supposed to be there. And it was even seen as inhabited by a spirit of fire itself. So setting up sacred space is about creating a microcosm, a model of the mythological universe in that place, so that you then become the center of all things and can therefore access all worlds. Okay, you're creating a liminal space between worlds in the center, and so by creating that space, you can then access all the spirits, the gods, the worlds, etc. Okay, and this is one of the first key jobs when you're creating a ritual process. Now, I'm not going to say that we have lots of evidence of that from the Viking Age. We don't. Okay, but we don't have a lot of evidence about what their ritual structure was. We'll talk about some stuff later, but basically we don't have a lot of evidence of this. But what we can do is pull pieces together and create something that works for us, that makes sense in the context of how they believed and how we believe. Okay, and we talked about the fact that Claude Lecoultre, in his book, he talks about the 3 steps to setting up sacred space. First, you're placing yourself under the protection of a strong spirit. In this case, we're talking about Thor in heathenry, but other pagan religions will have different spirits. So you place yourself under the protection of this strong spirit. Then, number 2, you ritually mark out the space or the enclosure, and you claim it with a staff and with fire. Okay, maybe you mark the boundaries with stakes and a rope, and you circumambulate around the area. Okay, and then number 3 is you're doing a contract with the guardian spirits of the place, because remember that the place actually is not yours. It's originally the guardian spirit of that place, the land spirit or the house spirit or whoever. Okay, so you contract with them by leaving out an offering for the house wight or the land wight at the edge of the space. Okay, and so they then will not interfere, hopefully will not interfere, because they've been appeased with this offering. So that's your 3-step process. We're going to actually turn that into a 9-step process, okay, which we'll go through. And because I want to add some other different elements in. And these 9 steps will help you to really create sacred space in your mind and in the place you are, and will really just help you set you up for ritual. Okay. So, firstly, let's think about some key things to think about when you're setting up at sacred space. Okay. So, firstly, focus and purification of the mind. Okay. For ritual, we want to have a mind that's not distracted. Okay, we want it to be we don't want it to be focused on the negative or the destructive. As I said before, it's supposed to be a frith mindset. Okay, we want to be focused on the spiritual, not the ordinary. We all come into ritual, we'll have other everyday concerns, we'll have things worrying us, or we're anxious about something, or angry maybe about something, or whatever. We need to set that aside. Okay, we need to be focused. We need to have a purified mind that's clearly focused on the spiritual side of things. Okay, so as I said, we're going to talk about this concept of frith, which essentially means peace, in module 10 when we look at ethics, because this is also an ethical principle, but it has a crossover here because of the fact it means peace, and we want to have this peace in our minds when we're trying to do our rituals. Okay. We can see this example of frith, in fact, in a ritual context by looking at the taboo against having weapons in sacred places. So, as I said before, when you look at the Freyr's temple, you weren't allowed to have weapons in there. Okay. During the festivities of Nerthus, also, there's this quote from Tacitus: "They do not undertake hostilities nor take up arms. Every weapon is put away. Peace and quiet then only are known and welcomed." Okay, so this suggests this is what the mindset, the situation should be like if you're going to do a ritual. Okay, this peace and quiet where there's no hostility, there's no weapons, that sort of thing, especially if you're doing this with other people. Another thing to think of is you don't want to be putting an iron into these ritual settings. That's because iron has traditionally throughout history been seen as something that repels spirits. It's good as a protective item, basically, against spirits. So you don't want to put iron there in any way, basically, because it could, well, it'll stop the spirits coming for a start. Okay. So we should not enter the space with iron. We should not enter the space hostile to others. We need to be in this positive, peaceful frame of mind. Okay. If you are in an argument with someone, you need to make peace with them first before you can do your ritual. Okay. And as I said, it also means focus. Okay. We need to make sure it's whether it's us or other attendees, we're all focused on what we're about to do and on the gods and spirits we're about to honor. A good way of doing this is breathing deeply. Okay, or meditating to calm the mind and alter our state of consciousness. Okay, so that's how we start off. We start off with focusing and purifying the mind and our attitudes towards other people. Okay. Next, we need to sort of then declare our purpose. What is it that we're here to do? Okay, we need to explain, whether that's to our own subconscious or to anyone else attending, including the gods and spirits, what is the purpose of this ritual? Why are we doing it? Okay. And often this involves appealing to historical precedent. We're doing X because this is what our ancestors did. Okay. Then we also need to think about the mythic time and the starting and ending of ritual. Okay, because there is normal time and there is mythic time, the time outside of time, the liminal time. Okay. We're not just entering sacred space, we're entering this sacred time as well. Okay. And we need to be in this liminal time, this in-between time. Okay, that's the best time to be doing these rituals. Okay, and so we do this by marking off the ritual time from ordinary time with a signal. Okay, and that signal could be at the beginning or at the end of a ritual. Often that could be blowing a horn, ringing a bell, banging a drum or hammer, just something that marks physically that the time has started, that you're now going into a sacred time instead of just being in your ordinary everyday time. And then you want to maybe consider direction. Now, this isn't massively important. But what direction should you face in ritual? Where should your altar be? Should you face east? So east is the place of the rising sun. A lot of ritual is done towards the east. The Akabot charm for the Anglo-Saxons again talks about facing the east. What about the north? If you're doing something to hell or to the ancestors, well, they're said to be in the north. So maybe you want to face the north. If you're in a circle, or you're in a or if you're leading the ritual and you've got other people around you, you'll obviously be facing towards those other participants. And maybe they're facing east or north or whatever. So it's something to think about. There's no set thing that you must face a particular way. I personally like to face east towards the sun or the sunrise, but it's really up to you what direction you want to face. Okay, use the lore as you read through it to decide what's best based on maybe the particular spirits you're going to be honoring and things like that. Okay. And again, let's talk a little bit about hallowing. So this is the fifth thing to be considering when we're talking about sacred space. Okay. So we did mention it in module 2. Okay, but I want to focus on hallowing in a bit more detail. Okay. So to hallow basically means to change the basic nature of something into something sacred. Okay. It's to bless and protect a place, a person, an object, and to set it apart as sacred. And in the lore, this is normally done by Thor, okay? Or you call on Thor and it's done. So you see him often using his hammer to, whether it's hallowing a bride, we see in the wedding rituals, or to hallow a vey of sacred space. He hallows Baldur's funeral pyre. It's used to hallow a newborn child. He uses his hammer to restore life to his goats, essentially hallowing them. And he's called on repeatedly on runestones to hallow the runestone, okay? To say Thor Vigi, Thor hallow this runestone, this Thor protect or Thor bless this runestone, okay? And Thor himself is actually called Veir, which means warder of the Vey, so protector of the Vey, okay, or hallower of the Vey. And the word for hallow, Vigja, is seen on many runestones, as I've said. So Thor is the one that really blesses and protects and hallows a place. It sets it apart as a sacred place. Okay. But hallowing also, and he often does that in the context of community rituals, marriages, religious practices, funerals, newborn children. Okay. But it can also involve other aspects too. You don't just have to use a hammer to hallow a space. Okay, you can set up Veibond ropes. You can walk around the boundaries with fire. You can set up a staff. All of these are ways in which people in the past would mark out or declare a space to be sacred and hallowed. Okay, so that's one part. But you can also think about possibly using the 4 compass directions. Now, often you will see this in Wicca. Okay, they'll go to the 4 watchtowers, the 4 directions, and set up or call in the guardians or the elements or the spirits. But we can also see this used slightly in some heathen things, and there is a more modern heathen idea of doing the hammer rite, where you go to the 4 corners and raise the hammer, which is more modern, but has the flavor of what we can find in the past. Okay, so you can use the 4 compass directions yourself. You can set up special symbols at those directions as part of this creation, this hallowing of sacred space. Okay, for example, we know that Icelandic settlers set up holy symbols on boundary markers of their properties. Perhaps these were protective symbols, but certainly at a boundary, they would set up a stone often with symbols on it. You could decide to call in the dwarves. Okay, now it does talk in the Poetic Edda about there's 4 dwarves stationed at each direction, and they hold up the sky, which is Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri. for north, south, east, and west. We do have some evidence of rituals that involve the four cardinal directions, or arguably the four corners, but they're often from Christian times. Okay, so they may have a pre-Christian practice that they're building on, but they could equally just have been something that Christians have invented. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. So we don't have any direct evidence that it definitely was use of the four corners in, or four compass directions in ancient heathenry. So you've got the acrobot charm, where you have to dig up 4 bits of turf from 4 corners, and you put offerings and crosses in the holes, and then you replace the turf, and that's supposed to make the land fertile again. So that's one example. You've got some Old English protective charms, which again call for putting crosses at the 4 compass points or striking blows in 4 directions. Okay. We have medieval Europeans who set up weather crosses around the fields to protect their crops. We have Nordic farmers who set out chalk tiles in the 4 corners of a field to protect it from weeds. Okay, so folklore is providing here examples of spells, examples of actions directed at the 4 directions or the corners. Okay, so you can use this as an inspiration for your rituals as well. Okay, you don't have to. And like I said, the evidence going back to actual heathen times is very limited on this, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it. Okay, because there are ways of incorporating these into your setting up of sacred space. Particularly, it orients you in the world as well. So that's a good reason why you might want to do it. So we talked about the different things you can think about, okay, when it comes to sacred space. Now I want to go through what I would say was the 9-step setting up sacred space process. Okay, we're expanding the stuff that Lakuto said about. We're going to add in the bits and pieces that we've just talked about, and we're just going to put it together into a 9-step process. This is how you set up a ritual. At least this is the way I'm recommending you set up a ritual. You don't have to do this. This is something I've pulled together from various different sources and ideas and thoughts. You could do something different, but I like the number 9 because it's a sacred number in heathenry, and it also gets all those little bits and pieces together into a nice structure for you. Okay, and like I said, I like ritual practice that involve lots of steps and things. So if you like that sort of thing, you'll like this as well. Okay. Can you simplify it? Of course you can. Can you expand it? Yes, you can. But this is just my way of what I'm going to suggest that you do. Okay. So step 1, preparation and setup. Okay, this is where you make sure you have everything you need for your ritual. You have your altar set up, you have your fire, your well, and your tree on the altar. You may want to mark out the enclosure or the space with some ropes. You choose your time. Are you going to do it at a liminal time like sunset or sunrise? Where are you going to do it? Where is this liminal place that you want to do it? Is it going to be outside? Is it going to be inside? Okay. Is it going to be on the seashore? Is it going to be on the edge of a forest? What is the place that you're going to do it? Okay. So it's all the preparation step. Okay. Setting everything up, making sure you've got everything, choosing the time and the place, etc. Writing your script, that sort of stuff. Okay. The next stage is the purification, whether that's of you or of the participants. Okay. So you make sure that you're bathed and well groomed beforehand. You get rid of these negative thoughts and focus on frith, on a state of peace. You maybe purify your hands, mouth, and forehead with Kernip's water, and you put on your oath arm ring. Okay, because as we said, the oath arm ring. Well, we'll talk about it more, but basically, priests would have to wear that in the temple when they're doing any rituals. So have your oath arm ring ready. Okay. Then there's the call to the ritual. So the beginning, the entering of the sacred and mythic time. And this could just be blowing a horn, ringing a bell, banging a drum or your hammer. Okay, so that's step 3. Step 4 was procession to the sacred space. So either you're carrying your offerings, or maybe you're carrying fire, or maybe you're carrying god statues and chanting their name as you process from the starting point to the place where you're going to do your ritual. Okay, so you've got preparation, you've got purification, you've got calling of the ritual, and then you've got procession to sacred space. Okay. When you get to the sacred space, then you need to start the hallowing process. And this is the 3 stages from Lakuto. So number 1, you invoke and place yourself under the protection of Thor. Okay. Number 2, you're ritually marking out the space and enclosure. So you can claim it with a staff. You can circumambulate with the fire and the hammer. You could think about raising the hammer in the 4 directions as you walk around. And then you want to light the main hearth fire, the main central fire, okay, that you're going to use for your ritual. Incidentally, if you've got other little fires, you may have already lit a lot of these sort of candles and things prior to everything. So step 1, you may have already lit a lot of your candles and things. And then final stage of hallowing, stage 3, is that establishing frith, okay? That contract, this is frith not just now between you and other participants or peace in your mind. This is frith and peace with the guardian spirits of the place, okay? The house white or the land white, you leave out that offering at the edge of the area, okay? So that's hallowing stage 3, okay? Now, sort of related to the purification bit, but I created it as a separate stage because you want to be doing basically getting focus, an altered state of consciousness practice. You want to enter the altered state of consciousness, okay? And often this is done by deep breathing or meditation. Now you may perhaps deep breathe for 9 times, because again it's the 9 sacred number, or you may choose, for instance, to do 9 minutes of meditation, to give you that chance to sort of calm your mind down and really get into that ultra state of consciousness, okay? Really get into a focused state of mind. And we are going to talk about ultra states of consciousness further on in this, okay? And then you have that declaration of purpose, that historical precedent. Maybe you talk about the creation myth, maybe that sort of sets the stage for what you're going to be doing. Maybe you talk about another myth. Maybe you just explain what's going on, okay? You have some sort of declaration of what you're going to do, okay? Now, you can choose to move some of these things around. I've put them in a particular order because I like it in that order, but you can choose to move things. For instance, part 8, you might want to move next to the purification part. I think it makes sense to do it at step 8 because then you'll have done all this sort of moving around and lighting of fires and claiming and just making the space sacred, okay? And then you can make yourself sacred. So there are 9 stages for setting up sacred space, okay? Make sure you've got a note of these written down so you can use them. And in our ritual structure, or ritual scripts that I give you, it's going to have these 9 stages as well, okay? Along with prayers and things to say at each stage. So these stages, they're based in various bits of lore, okay? As we've explained. But there's nothing in the lore that sets out a process like this for setting up sacred space. It's an educated guess that I've done on how it might have been done or how I think it should be done now, okay? Based on what we know. So you can change it. You don't have to use this, but it gives you, if you're new to ritual or you don't have a ritual structure you like, this is a good way of starting out, okay? Okay, so let's talk about tools, okay? So a key, really important thing, and if you forget something, this can cause all sorts of issues for your ritual, is make sure you have your tools and your offerings ready before your ritual. Have something written down with a list of all your tools, all your offerings that you're going to need in that ritual, okay? And maybe use the same things every ritual so that you've got this one list, okay? And then have that and check before you do your ritual. So in your preparation step 1, do you have every single tool and offering, okay, that you need, okay? When it comes to tools, make sure they're all clean, okay? You're using this for ritual purposes. So what I would suggest is maybe have a set of tools that you only ever use for ritual purposes. So don't have a bowl that you use for your offering bowl and then you go and have breakfast in it the next day, okay? Have a separate particular bowl, maybe go to a charity shop or a thrift store and buy a separate little bowl that's nice that you can use for your ritual purpose. And then treat it as sacred, as set apart from the mundane, not for normal life, but for ritual practice, okay? And do that with all your tools. Make sure they're clean, make sure they're set apart, and then importantly, lay them out on your altar in a way that's easy to get hold of, okay? You don't want to knock things over when you're doing this, and especially you don't want to get burned. So be careful about where you're putting candles and lighting stuff, so that you don't, well, if you're picking stuff up, you're not going to be suddenly putting your robe in a flame and burning yourself, okay? So you need to think about fire safety. You need to think about where you're going to need to access things, the things that you're going to need to access maybe closer to you or away from fires, okay? So that's some things just to think about when you're thinking about your tools. Now, we talked about the fact that there are 9 key tools, okay? And I think if you're doing rituals, you should try to get all 9, okay? However, there are, I would say, 4 most essential ones, okay? You've got your fire and your fire starting equipment. So that could be the candles, that could be matches, all that sort of stuff. Your offering bowl, your chlortain, your sprinkling twig, and your drinking horn with a stand or a cup. If you don't have a horn, a cup is fine as well. So you must have those 4 things. You can't do a ritual without them, okay? Because you're going to have to toast, you're going to have to offer, you're going to have to sprinkle the blessings back, and you're going to need a fire to welcome the spirits. Otherwise, they're probably not going to come, okay? Or it could be an electric candle as well if you don't have proper fire. But you need those 4 things. That's like the very minimum stuff. I would argue that you also need these other things though as well. So you need your bowl of water to represent the well, your tree representation, whether that's a bonsai tree, a stick, a picture of a tree, a crystal tree, whatever, a statue of a tree, something like that. You need a hammer for helping with your hallowing. You need images of deities and spirits. And if you're doing like a big, large ritual with lots of people, maybe there's banners as well involved with that bit. And then you've got your oath arm ring, okay? Because we know in the past that oath arm rings were important in rituals. So you have god statues would often have arm rings on. There's a heathen law code, in fact, that says that a silver arm ring must be kept in every temple and worn by a gothi in ritual, okay? And in fact, it has to be reddened with sacrificed animal blood first. Obviously don't do that part necessarily, but you should have some sort of arm ring to wear, traditionally silver one, as part of your ritual practice, okay? And then also another essential thing obviously is your offerings. That's not one of your key tools, but it's obviously vitally important you have that, because that's going to be necessary in your ritual. So there's your 9 key tools, 4 absolutely essential ones and 5 really, really recommended ones, okay? You also have some other highly recommended tools, okay? So maybe a blowing horn to start around the ritual, or a bell, okay, or a drum. So this is basically to make that sound at the beginning. Bell is probably going to be your cheapest option. And the sound of a bell is actually said to banish bad spirits as well. So that's helpful for purification of the area and the hallowing of the area. It's highly recommended that you have incense. So with incense, what you can do is get a charcoal burner and these little charcoal discs. Make sure you've got some tongs to hold them because they'll get hot. And you can light it, let it go white after a while, and then put your incense on it. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Or you can get your incense sticks or something like that, but something to make the area smell nice and to attract the spirits. Okay. Just be careful that you ventilate the area well if you're doing stuff inside, because obviously it's putting lots of pollutants into the air that are bad. It's like smoking basically. If you do find that you suffer with issues like that, I do myself. You can get one of those burners where you put a small candle underneath and you put water and essential oil in, and you could burn incense as an essential oil. Basically, you burn an essential oil and it has the same sort of smell and effect. Okay. The staff, as part of the ritual practice of claiming the space, having a staff that you can claim the space with. An offering plate. So we've got the offering bowl for any liquid, but if you're going to give food offerings, you'll need maybe an offering plate. Clothing. If you're going to wear clothing in your rituals, maybe a robe or something like that, you're going to want to have a special robe or special clothing set apart. Maybe some special jewelry as well, set apart for your rituals in particular. A divination set, I'd argue this is actually really important, this one, because you need to be able to check, well, were the offerings actually accepted? Were they good enough or not? So have some sort of rune set or other divination method so you can check the offerings were accepted. Obviously, you need your altar, and you may want to put an altar cloth. Now, traditionally, this was done with linen. Linen is a very natural material, so you might want to get a linen altar cloth. A few small things to remember. Weapons are banned from ritual areas, except perhaps a special knife that's carrying out the sacrifice, but we're not going to be doing that in the modern day. But really, in the past, that was the case. Weapons were banned from ritual areas. And feel free to carve your tools. Okay, you may want to add runes images on your tools. You may want to add images of the gods and things like that. So feel free to carve your tools as well. Okay. Okay, let's talk about dress. Okay, so what are you going to wear in your ritual? So remember here, you're inviting the gods and the spirits. You're inviting guests. Okay, so you want to look your best. And as I said, it's a good idea to have a special set of clothing that's only used for ritual, like a ritual robe or something like that, or even sort of old traditional heathen clothing. Okay. One thing you could consider is a tabard, okay, which goes something that you basically, there's a thing that goes down your front, a thing that goes around on your back, and there's a hole for your head. And so like the old sort of knights would wear. This makes it easier to carry to a site if you're doing stuff outdoors, and it's really simple to make. You just need a long piece of material and to do some cutting, maybe a bit of sewing, and it's fine. You can put it quickly over your clothes, and then you're immediately in your ceremonial dress. So if you don't want to do a robe, or you can't afford a robe, or you're worried about being seen outside in a robe that would draw crowds and things, a tabard is an example of something you could do instead. And Vatnsdæla Saga 26 mentions, as we said, these block clothes. The Gotland picture stones show the priests in the long robes. Okay, so you could have special clothes, because at least there's two examples here where special clothes seem to be being worn in ritual contexts. Body paint. Maybe you want to put some sort of face paint or body paint on in some way to with special symbols, runes or a Thor's hammer or something like that. You could go skyclad, which basically means nude. Okay, Wicca, for instance, is famous for its ritual nudity, and the reason why is it's seen why they do it nude is it's seen as a way to be more natural, more in harmony with nature, and also removing any barriers between you and the spirits. Okay. And as we said, there is some evidence for ritual nudity in heathenry. You've got the Bronze Age rock art figures. You've got Tacitus talking about the young men dancing naked over spears. You've got Ibn Fadlan talking about the man who lit the funeral pyre being nude. So there's examples that you can draw and say you want to do that. But equally, you've got Havemal who says the naked man is despised. So you've got contradictory things here. Okay. It seems the earlier back in time, the more likely they were to be nude. And then when you get to the Viking Age and stuff, it tends to be clothed by that time. Okay. But ultimately, it's up to you what you're going to do. It's important to think when you're deciding what to wear outdoors. What's the weather going to be like? Okay. Is there going to be a lot of mud around? Are you going to ruin your robe if there's a lot of mud around? Okay. So think about that. Also think about your fire. Be careful with what clothing you're going to wear. If you've got a robe and it's got flowing arms and things like that, it could well get burned. Okay. If you're putting it over the fire accidentally or a candle accidentally. So just be very careful. Think about the practicalities, okay, of where you're doing the ritual, what's going to be involved, and then also the historical precedents that we've got for both clothes and non-clothes. Okay. Now, we've got some examples here of ritual clothing. Okay. Now in Byzantium, there's this tale, or not tale, this is account of the Viking Varangian Guard, okay? And they wore animal skins and masks, okay? And they went around Yule, banging shields and shouting, well, it's Toll, which we think was Yule, okay? Shouting that at the time as part of their celebrations of Yule. You have the church fathers who are repeatedly condemning the wearing of masks at various festivals, especially in winter. Okay, so we've got masks you might want to consider. We've got headdresses. These seem to be wearing some sort of headdress with two birds coming out the top. Okay, so they're images of ancient heathens doing ritual dances while wearing headdresses, and they're, well, I say they're birds, but they're sort of serpent turning into birds with bird head at the very top and the serpent body. And you can see this on the Sutton Hoo template, the Torslanda plates, which you've got there. You've got the elk hammer dancer pendant as well there. So there's examples of headdresses being worn, okay? We found images of, and we found actual animal masks and images of people wearing animal masks, okay? At Hedderby, at Fen Drayton, okay? You've got headdresses, as I said. These may actually be images of Odin, okay, because Odin is supposed to have these two ravens, Hugin and Munin. So it could be that these are representations of him with the Hugin and Munin ravens, birds. However, if you look at the pictures, a lot of them do not have the one eye. A lot of them have both eyes. So it's questionable, but some do have one eye. So it's questionable whether it is the ravens or not, and whether it's Odin or not. The berserker, there's a berserker people which were sort of warriors that may have worn some sort of masks, animal masks. They're associated very much with wolves and bears, so that may also play into this. But you could quite easily argue that you don't need to be a berserker type person to be wearing these masks, and that these are not necessarily berserkers. They could just be normal people in ritual wearing masks, headdresses and things, okay? And in an animistic culture, which we know that heathenry was, they could have been used by ritual participants to call in the power of the animal to themselves, okay? So maybe they wore masks to bring in the power of that animal into them, okay, as part of this ritual. And we could do the same, basically. And it's quite likely that they are figures reenacting myths, okay, as part of rituals, okay. They're not, this is just not just normal dress. This does seem to be like, maybe there is some sort of myth going on that they're reenacting here, okay. And that's why they're wearing animal skins, animal masks, headdresses and things like that. And so you could think, do you want to have those sorts of things in your ritual? Can you reenact some myths in your ritual? And would you need those things for that? Especially, it seems like the winter ones, like Winter Nights and Yule. Okay. Now let's move into discussing something else, the ecstatic. Okay. And we're going to talk about drinking as well here. Okay. I will say at the beginning that you don't have to drink alcohol in ritual, but you do need to think about ways of getting into an ecstatic state. Okay, this means an altered state of consciousness. So let's go through it and discuss it, and then I'll give you sort of examples and what we need to do. Okay, so firstly, ritual should not be boring. Okay, if you've gone to a church and you've had a liturgy ritual and it's been really boring and stuff, there's no point in such rituals like that. Okay, they shouldn't be boring. Okay, they should move us and they should move the gods emotionally. Okay, they should not just be the plain old simple Protestant style, nothing interesting happening, When people think about a boring version of church, for instance, they should not be like that, okay? And heathen rituals can be like that, okay? Instead, they should be something that moves us, that's ecstatic, that's emotional, okay? They should have elements of both the silence and the mystery, but also the ecstatic and the emotional side of things, okay? One of the gods we worship, Odin, his very name means frenzy, fury, madness, and ecstasy. Okay, and he was known to induce such states in his followers, such as in the berserkers. Okay, the warriors who were thought to be sort of gone mad, basically, and so they would be really courageous in battle and things. But similarly, when we're doing ritual, we should have ritual that is ecstatic to us. Yes, there's a place for the silence, the mystery as part of that, but also the ecstatic and emotional side as well. We know, for instance, that drinking alcohol was part of ancient heathen ritual, okay? And this is one way to get into an altered state of consciousness. Though remember that Havamal cautions against getting drunk. So tipsy, okay, drunk, not okay, okay? And mead was considered to give poetic inspiration, okay? And that would be through an ecstatic experience, okay? That's how they would get their poetic inspiration. So you can do this in lots of ways. You can do repetitive chanting. Okay, if you repeatedly chant something, it's going to get you into that altered state of consciousness. You could dance. A lot of shamanic cultures, they dance even to exhaustion to get into a trance. Okay, you've got drumming, which if you do it at the right beat, which is like 4 beat, I think it's 4 beats a second or something like that. Or banging shields, which we have evidence of banging shields. And so, yeah, drumming, banging shields, that can help alter your state of consciousness. Alcohol, as I said, also does it. So all of these things, like maybe you bring all of them together, maybe you have 1 or 2 of them. Okay, you can combine them or use them to experience the altered state of consciousness or trance in participants, okay, whether you or other people. So a great way, as I said, is repetition of words or music or rhythm. So repetitive chanting, but it could be other types of music and rhythm as well. And it's a great way to induce a light trance, okay, an altered state of consciousness that's a light trance. You can do things 3 or 9 times because 3 and 9 are both sacred numbers, okay? So again, that's another way to help do the repetitive stuff. So you maybe want to do things 9 times. Or 3 times 9 times, or 9 times 9 times, however you want to do it, however long it takes to get you into that state. Sensory deprivation also really helps. For example, darkness, okay, or moving between darkness and light constantly, okay. That will help you to enter into that altered state of consciousness. One example of how you can do this is have a room that's, if you're doing it indoors, that's lit only with candlelight, okay? And have some simple music and repetitive chanting going on, okay? And that can be quite the hypnotic, trance-inducing experience. If you want to have a look at how this can work, there's a Christian community called Taizé. They're based in France, and they have a very, they're sort of growing quite a lot. A lot of people have got involved with them. They have a very simplistic ritual practice, but it's very sort of ecstatic, emotional type thing. And I think we can adopt that into heathenry. Okay, so basically they, if you look on YouTube, you'll see there are things. They'll have a room, but it's all candlelit. It's dark, but it's candlelit, and they'll have very simple chanting and music. People will just keep chanting the same couple of lines over and over again, and it will induce a hypnotic trance within them. Okay, so you can have that in your rituals as well. Okay, dancing, especially if it's repetitive movements, again, this can induce your trance states because you come out of yourself, you're not thinking about what you're doing, your mind can come out of that and go into a trance state, basically. Now, we don't have evidence from heathen times that they actually did these things, but we do have the evidence of Odin being a god of frenzy and fury and ecstasy. We do have drinking the poetic mead of inspiration. Okay, we knew they held We do know that they held their rituals in halls lit by fires and candles. We know that singing and chanting and dance was part of their rituals. So it's very unlikely that they didn't have some sort of ecstatic stuff within their rituals, okay? It wasn't this boring church-like speaking and things like that. It was emotional and ecstatic, okay? And so we can use some of this evidence in our rituals, okay? So think about how can you build these things into your rituals. And we're going to talk later about performance and how this all fits into that as well. So let's just talk about drinking very quickly, okay? So we know that drinking and toasting was a very important part of heathen religious ritual. And we know that there were often like 3 rounds or multiple rounds for like gods and ancestors and things like that. Again, we're going to talk about this in the blot and symbol part of this module, okay? But also Havamal does condemn drinking too much. The key here is moderation, okay? So if you're going to drink in your ritual, that's fine, but you have a small amount, enough to get maybe tipsy. Don't go any further than that, okay? As we said, we're going to talk about symbol and blot, okay, later. And one of these most sacred rituals was this symbol, okay, which basically consists of ritual toasts to gods and ancestors, okay? So we know that there is ritual drinking going on, okay? The farmers of Thrandheim, they had to attend sacrifices in the temple, in the Hof, and join in a particular ceremonial beer drinking, okay? King Hakon, he was forced to give toast to the gods and then to eat horse liver, okay? He also commanded people to brew enough beer for Yule. Okay, so he felt that beer was important in ritual for Yule. King Eric of Sweden, he drank a horn in honor of a god and then asked various questions of that god. So it gets him into this state of ecstatic, altered state of consciousness type thing. And then he's asking questions of that god. There's a special drink called a bragaful, the chieftain's toast, which is often accompanied by oaths. And then there's the mini, the toast to the ancestors. Like I said, we're going to go into more detail about these things in the video on blot and some. Okay. Turvil Petra, the historian, he says that the Fagurskinna author says this: in the old days, people poured out the full as they now did the mini, and they assigned the full to their mightiest kinsman, or else to Thor or other gods. Okay, so this is talking about how they're toasting to not only the gods, but also to their ancestors. Okay. You've got Alpha Blot, which mentions beer men being stood there and guarding the place. And so clearly beer has some sort of important ritual practice for Alpha Blot. Okay, maybe they brewed the beer for it. Mead, as we said, it's a sacred drink from the gods, and it gives this inspiration, it gives this gift of poetry. We also know that they drank ale and beer and wine, as well as mead, okay? So beer and drinking is part of the culture, okay? Caesar says that the German peoples drank often from the horns of great aurochs. Now, aurochs are like massive cattle. They're extinct now, but in heathen times they were around. And they have horns, really big horns, and so people would drink from those. You've got archaeological evidence of horns as well, found in a lot of the graves, like the Sutton Hoo graves, the grave mounds. You've also got the Galahus horns. Okay. Beowulf depicts a lot of drinking ceremonies. Okay. The symbol is one of those. You've got horns that were called Grim, which is also a byname for Odin, basically. So they're named after Odin. And the brewing of ale was often linked to Odin, okay? And gods were considered to have brewed the original mead, okay? They made it out of spit and the blood of Kvasir, I believe. So mead is in particular is associated with religious practice, and obviously mead as alcohol is going to have an effect on your consciousness, your state of consciousness, basically. Turvil Petra, again, he talks about this drinking. He says, the meaning of the sacrificial feast, when the toasts were drunk, men were symbolically joined with gods and with their dead ancestors, sharing their mystical powers. This is a form of communion. So we're saying that the drinking, actually, the toasting, the sacrificial feast, all of this joins people together, not only themselves, but with gods and ancestors and with their powers. Okay, you're communing with the gods and the spirits and each other by taking part in these toasts. Some practical considerations, though. Okay, family and group rituals. Consider those who are teetotal. Okay, especially if you're organizing a ritual, consider those who are teetotal, who don't drink alcohol. Consider children. Okay, consider the risk of illness spreading. Okay, so have a cup for each person, or ask them to bring their own. Okay, so they're not sharing cups and spreading illness. And also have a non-alcoholic drink option. Okay, and you can make a sort of non-alcoholic honey drink pretty easily. There's recipes on YouTube and things for that. So you don't have to have a honey. Sorry, you don't have to have an alcoholic honey drink, alcoholic mead. You can have a non-alcoholic mead as well. Okay, particularly for children and those who are teetotal. Think about who are going to be the cup bearers giving out the drink. Who's going to carry around the big horn and pour it out to each person's cup? Okay. And do you need multiple people? If you've got a big crowd, you're not going to want one person going around and doing it, because everybody's going to get bored and switch off within seconds. You need maybe multiple people doing that. And of course, consider drinking laws. Some places it's banned to drink alcohol out in public. So consider that if you're holding your ceremonies outdoors. But indoors, you should be fine. Okay, so we are going to explore drinking more in the Living a Heathen Life module, but just for now, note that it should be part of your rituals, some sort of drinking and toasting. And if you do drink alcohol, then it's one of the good methods for creating that altered state of consciousness. Whether it's good for your health, though, is another matter, so obviously consider that as well. But certainly in a ritual context, that's what it can be used for. And some people will only drink alcohol in a ritual context. They won't drink alcohol anytime outside of that. I think that's a good, healthy practice to have. Right. Okay, I'm going to finish this video here. And in the next video, we're going to carry on with talking about ritual tools and techniques, and this time about the performance side of things.